Now, recently chosen by the Mail and Guardian as one of South Africa's pioneers in the green economy, Marc Sherratt has designed some of the most progressive green buildings in the country. An architect and net zero accredited professional, he founded Marc Sherratt Sustainability Architects in 2017. This is certainly a very interesting career for most, so here is Marc.
All right. Sure, just thank you for having me. We're just going to take you through a quick presentation of the life of our architectural firm and a little bit of our journey, and hopefully you get inspired from that. Renzo Piano is an Italian architect. He speaks about architecture being kind of the last great adventure. Most of the world has been discovered. So how do you really choose a career based on design and inspiration? And architecture is one of those things. We are an architectural firm that's specialized in sustainability, so maybe a little bit different to most architectural firms. Sustainability has been used as a kind of term around the industry, meaning 1,000 things. So this is kind of one of the few definitions I've put into the presentation. Really, we're trying to design buildings in the spaces in which we live in a sustainable way, which really means really understanding how the planet works and making sure we are living within that ecological capacity. So our mission statement as a practice is reversing local extinction, both cultural extinction and ecological extinction within our built environment. Obviously, we live in Africa, so some of our architectural solutions also have to deal with social economic upliftment. And so architecture itself, at its base core, is a social science. Buildings are also really resource heavy. So buildings use 12% of all fresh water globally. They generate 40% of all waste sent to landfill. And so part of being an architect is managing where your material is coming from, designing a building in a way that is resource efficient. In terms of our beginning of our practice, we did a lot of traveling, just understanding what were the conditions, what are African conditions, and how could we define solutions that are African-based. This is traveling from the Okavango Delta in Botswana, and really learning from the landscape and translating the way that people live into design. We saw climate change projections firsthand. So this is the Karoo, and it's basically changing to hardcore desert. We're seeing these changes on site already. A lot of our research is based on learning from how vernacular or rural people live and taking that kind of intelligence into architectural design, as well as learning from species, how have they adapted to their climate, taking those design strategies into buildings and into the spaces in which we live. A couple of the projects that we've done, for you to understand kind of the complexity around architecture, you're generally dealing with multiple design disciplines and leading those design disciplines in a holistic design process. This is one of our projects in Alexandra Township, quite a difficult place to live, a settlement area that's growing by 3 people an hour, dealing with difficult challenges like fire. How do we design housing that's resistant to fire? This is the housing unit within Alex, specifically designed to resist fire. Another scale, COVID has been a big thing, challenging architects to redesign healthcare facilities. This is a healthcare facility in Springs. We actually used what some people would say are primitive materials in the building fabric. This is a building clad with recycling PET bottles or plastic bottles on the facade to both protect the glass from shading in terms of solar gains of sunlight. The bottles are quite interesting. We designed a pollution sensing facade so that it actually changes color at night depending on surrounding air pollution. This is just what it looks like on the inside. As an architect, you're dealing both with the digital side of computer modeling, drawing up buildings online, as well as being on site. And obviously, you're part of a team and leading that team, which requires really good people skills to do. Some other pictures of the clinic itself. Again, a lot of work is done within 3D modeling programs, similar programs to what animators use to try and give the client a realistic understanding of what the building might look and feel like. Another scale, so architects don't just deal with buildings, they also deal with the spaces around buildings. So that would include things like public transport, parks, basically any space that people interact with. This is a project that we've designed in the Braamfontein Spruit in Johannesburg, dealing with trying to provide some kind of facilitation to the homeless. This man, Alfred Nkize, has been living in the park for 31 years, and we actually argued to city parks, this should be the major user of a park more than the guy who walks his dog on 1 hour on a Saturday. How could we facilitate him, give him a job, give him dignity? And so we designed an urban farming scheme based, actually inspired by his story in terms of his background in farming, that would link to local restaurants and provide them with high-quality produce. Another different scale, this is dealing with one of our R&D projects. We're working with elephant conservationists to design an elephant migration route through the Limpopo province of South Africa. Most people don't know elephants are endangered species, and yet in South Africa we have an overpopulation of them within our game reserves. Elephants are quite destructive, as we know in Africa. As our cities are growing, wildlife areas are becoming increasingly constrained. And we try and contain wildlife using electric fences, and elephants are so smart they figure out how to get over electric fences quite easily. So there needs to be a different approach in how we deal with migratory animals like elephant. This is our migration route. This basically connects most of the game reserves in the Limpopo province. It's about 1,000 kilometers long, and allows something like an elephant to move across private land ownership between game reserves. This kind of scale hasn't been done before in the world. The system uses infrasonics, which is basically sound underneath human hearing, and that's the communication device that elephants use. They can probably hear it to about 4 kilometers using this infrasound. And so we've designed with musicians an elephant language in order to communicate to them, to basically tell them when to use the route and when not to. The architectural element are these sounding towers that house these speaker units that project sound to about 2 kilometers. The elephant, from an ecological role, is a seed dispersal agent. So it eats fruit, and then those fruit become fruiting trees over time. One of the fruiting trees that is well known within the Limpopo province is the marula tree. It basically can become a staple food for rural communities. And so what we've decided is to integrate this kind of tree planting passive strategy using elephants to kind of restore damaged land along this route. So in the first year, elephants would be fed these indigenous fruiting trees. After 5 years, something like the marula tree, really fast growing, is really up at a kind of 3-meter growth rate after the first 5 years. And then after 10 years, you've got a self-sustainable food forest that, when the elephants aren't migrating, becomes a food source for local communities. Again, we can't just be approaching design in Africa from one point of view in terms of just environmental. We also have to be thinking about social economic development. And what happens if elephants move through cities? What might that do to something like the city of Johannesburg? And this is our team on site testing the infrasonic speakers and the elephant gate that uses AI technology to identify an animal, obviously only open for elephant, and make sure it doesn't open for any other high-value game. Some of the equipment that we use, generally as an architect, you're the leader of the professional team and coordinating a lot of the engineering disciplines, if that's electrical, mechanical, or structural civil engineers. And this is our AI system learning what an elephant looks like. First in the world, this has never been done before, and an elephant family actually using the gate itself. This is my last slide, just to encourage us as designers. Sometimes people think that we are behind the rest of the world. This is an image from an anthropologist, James Sussman, that argues that the most successful civilization by time is actually the San. They've been able to sustain their civilization for the longest period of time, and arguably they are one of the most sustainable civilizations. This is taking their worldview and translating that into our contemporary nature. They lived around water. Water is the central element. They used their hunting ground to supply all their food and medicine. Their camp was net zero carbon, didn't have any kind of carbon emissions. And then they had 2 spiritual understandings of the sky and the underworld. I've just superimposed personal dreams and governing authority onto that. So basically, my ending statement is just to say, us as Africans, there's so much that we can learn from each other in terms of sustainability and design. Architecture is one of the ways to do that, but has a massive impact on our lives because we interact with it almost every day. Almost omnipresent, but yeah, a good building is something that you don't really recognize if it's working or not. So you've got great power as an architect. Generally, a building lasts about 60 years, so some of the things that I design, I'll be dead before they've stopped being used. So yeah, thank you very much for your time.